Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to this special City Council meeting this Monday, April 20th. And this is a budget work session, one of a series that we're having. And so let's start with the roll call.
Lessem. Here. Fuller.
Here.
Hayes.
Here.
Janser.
Here.
Olson. Here. Pittner.
Here.
Samuelson.
Here.
Very good. Moving on, we will go into our agenda. Item 2 is presentation on the capital improvements plan. And so without further ado, Lance Meyer.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I think this will work, I assume, for the...
Is it on?
Doesn't seem like it's on.
That was it.
How about now?
Yep.
All right. Okay. Welcome, everyone. So, capital improvement time. We'll work through our presentation today and then open it up for questions, comments. I want to have some of our department heads talk if they want. I wanted to walk people through our capital improvement plan process, so some of the folks running for council positions are understanding of what this is and why we do it. We're going to provide some recommendations to you all for the budget process, and then if there's some time at the end, which there should be, then we can have some individual department discussions. So it won't be as long as last year where we went project by project, which got kind of redundant on some of them. It's going to be more high level, and then each department, if they need to, can chime in on a few specific things. So what is a capital improvement? Well, it falls in a few different project categories. I wish it was a little more straightforward, but in the government financing world that we live in, there's different ways and methods of how these projects get in here, so it's not as straightforward as we like, but generally it's any kind of new infrastructure. All of the airport's projects and their equipment are put into the city CIP so that they can in turn submit that to the FAA. So you'll notice all the other departments don't have equipment, just the airport, and that's the reason why. Any new buildings or major remodels, so like this building, for instance, basically it got down to the foundation and then rebuilt. That was considered a capital project. Any kind of special assessments will go in here. And then when we're completely rebuilding city infrastructure, so like our downtown project, when we removed and replaced everything, that goes in the capital improvement plan. What doesn't go in the CIP is maintenance projects. So essentially things like patching, sealing, mill and overlays even don't go in the CIP. Any kind of our utility replacements, so when we do water main replacements, with a caveat, when we have state or federal funding, we put it in here to recognize those funds. So any kind of internal city projects that we do, maintenance projects, we don't put those in the CIP. So why do we go through this process? Well, it's staff's method of communicating the infrastructure needs to not only council, but the public. So if there's a project that's submitted to us to put in here, one of the 77, that means the department felt it was important, and at some point the project needs to be funded and addressed. It's a financial planning tool for the city budget, so this is kind of step one of our infrastructure development. We talk about it here. Eventually the document gets approved, and then we as staff start to execute council's vision for these projects. There's a process, obviously, that we all go through. We're engaging with multiple departments, like engineering will coordinate with Public Works on utility design and how some of these projects should be laid out so that we can coordinate the different detours and infrastructure-related things, you with the council, and then obviously the public at the end. Ultimately, staff will execute the projects that council elects to fund. So even if it's approved in the CIP, but then later not funded in the budget, then staff won't work on that project because the funding didn't come. So in general, the way that we develop these projects is there's some sort of need that department sees. So like in my world with engineering, it might be a street that has to be reconstructed or old utility lines that have to be replaced for Jason's department and utilities. We gather a whole bunch of data sources, so it might be break data, it might be pavement condition index, and then we start looking at how do we scope this, or what's all going to be involved in the project, timelines and costs, and that all gets molded together in a big spreadsheet that we use to help display some of that information. We populate that spreadsheet. We have a check-in with finance to make sure that the project's feasible to fund. And then it goes in the draft CIP document. Something that's new this year that we implemented earlier this year was having a ranking committee help to distill down all of these various projects into tiers. So a tier 1 project would be a project that should be funded because it has a high priority based on the criteria that council has approved. So our committee has met and has evaluated all of those projects and then put those into a list just to help make this process a little easier so council and the public isn't so overwhelmed by all the data and the information. So now we'll dive into just a high-level overview of some of the CIP costs, just so you know where some of those things are coming from. It just helps to add some context to the document. So we're almost at $890 million in total needs over the next 5 years. Obviously, a lot of that is driven by the flood control project at almost $605 million. And so when you see these costs in the document, keep in mind that these are all-in costs, so state, federal, local. So we display them, basically lump sum together, and then they're broken down subsequently in the document. Our department in engineering has a significant amount of funding. It's primarily tied to large federal aid reconstruction projects that are in the later years of the CIP. Airport has a lot of big projects coming up here in the next couple of years. And then you'll notice down there at the bottom, our water utility has a lot of replacement scheduled. If you look at these totals by year, it's kind of a bell-shaped curve. Peaks in about 29 and then starts to drop a little bit. The majority of the CIP is driven by phases of flood control. So as you see, larger phases take shape over the next few years with maple diversion and some of the other phases. The overall spend level will increase primarily because of that project. If you look at funding source, primarily, the majority of the capital improvement plan is funded with federal and state funds. So state funds can be anything from cost matches on flood control. We have a lot of cost share coming in from Department of Water Resources on the water main replacement side. That could be Hub City Oil and Gas. So there's multiple funding sources from the state that comes in for that number. Local sales tax dollars is primarily going to flood control, but there is a handful of other projects that have some sales tax being dedicated to them as proposed in the document. You'll notice special assessments. It's hard to read the text, but it's about 1% of our total spend, and those are anticipated projects, not actually assessed projects at this point. Just a summary of this high-level document so far. Like I mentioned, the CIP is largely driven by flood control. So about 68% of our total CIP cost is in that one project with multiple phases. Several projects inside here are inserted for planning purposes. So like our wastewater treatment plant is a potential long down the road. We place that in there just for basically so council's aware of it. And then keep in mind, in addition to the costs that are outlined in our capital improvement plan, we're spending well over $15 million a year just on maintenance. So water main replacements and mill and overlays and that sort of thing. So we have a lot of dollars that are allocated to construction every year within our city budget. I wanted to spend some more time on this slide, which is our recommendations to you all. Basically, if you look at the criteria that we've developed and council has approved, it's really heavy on three categories. One, safety, coupled with complying with regulations that we have. asset maintenance, so taking our most expensive assets and replacing those and keeping those in good order. And then finally, financial feasibility, right? If you can't afford the project, then likely it's not going to score as many points. And so when you take that criteria and you look at these projects, these are the ones that rose to the top. So I'll just briefly go over a few of those, and then we can open it up for questions, and then we can have some of our city departments get into that as well. So on the airport side, so I've color-coded these here just for some clarity. Runway 826, the eastern half, so this year they're doing some rehab on the western half. And starting in 27, they would start to tackle the east half of that runway. We have some snow removal equipment that is in here. And then obviously this is the maintenance stuff here, the crack sealing and painting, both airside and land side. So you'll see how a lot of these projects here will take a higher score just because they're hitting a lot of those council-approved criteria. And then they have a couple of pieces of equipment here, this tractor and this mower to help maintain the airfield. My understanding is this is a combination piece, so they're listed separately because they're separate pieces, but when they submit that to the state to try to acquire some funding, they would be an all or nothing type of deal. Moving on to engineering department in this kind of orange color here. Our 3rd Street Bridge repairs. So what I'd like to do with this project is I'd like to take the work that KLJ is designing right now, which is the pier rehab. So much like what we did here the last year, but it's over the rail yard this time. We take that and we'd couple it with some of these more critical repairs that we anticipate coming when Collins Engineering does the inspection here in May. What I would like to do is try to do one project, take as many of those elements that need to be repaired as we can and put them in one project and then be done with the bridge for a while. The reason is the project development for designing a new structure is going to take us quite a bit longer than what we anticipated, which is going to drag out that schedule some. In addition, to do all the engineering and property acquisitions and some of the other tasks that are involved in a project of that size and scale, we don't have enough funds at this point for the engineering and all the other data acquisition needed. So we're going to have to stretch that schedule a little bit to try to account for that. And what I'd like to do is take this year 2 dollars and try to move that up so that we can have a bigger project, but addresses the most critical need to try to buy some time with that bridge. The other couple projects that I have are basically we're locked in with federal funds on the 16th Street interchange project, so that would replace the 3 traffic signals at the interchange, rehab all the concrete. We have a lot of broken slabs. It's a pretty rough ride, so we'd grind the pavement. We'd fix and replace the approach slabs that have both settled on both ends of the bridge. Basically, we haven't touched that whole project since it was built in the late 1980s. So it's time for a major rehab. We have federal dollars coming into that project. We were able to get some flex funds from the state, so that was $1.5 million injected into the project. That reduces our cost share. So that's a good, worthwhile project. Our 3rd Street Phase 1 of 3rd Street reconstruction is in design now. And then we have a rotation that I want to get started with our traffic signal replacements and our city bridge rehabilitation project. So this is a new project. And what I want to start doing is taking some of the sales tax dollars that we've been allocated for traffic signal replacements as that project starts to wind down and start to put that into bridge maintenance for our other city bridges. So we talk a lot about the 3rd Street Bridge, which has the most visible issues, but if you look at the other 12 bridges that the city owns in town, we still have some maintenance needs on those bridges. So I want to start rotating a bridge project with a traffic signal project here over the next few years to make sure those bridges don't deteriorate to the point where we have to do closures and other things like we're having to see with 3rd Street. And then the last project in engineering, you'll notice this is the only Tier 3 project that made it. So at this point, it's a Tier 3 project because we don't have all the funds lined up for a construction project. It's off in a distant future right now. It's grant dependent. We don't know if we would get grant funding to even start the design or the construction. So that's why it's lower in scale. But it's also funded with economic sales tax dollars. So it comes out of a different funding allocation. In the fire department, which is in the red color, they're looking at replacing their training classrooms over on the training ground site. They would start this year with some preliminary design, and then the main project would come in 28 if that moves forward. You'll see here in this purple color, we have the two immediate flood control projects that are going to be starting to gear up in 2027. Portions of them may be bid here in 26. You'll notice, a lot of for these projects, we put a lot of that cost up front, but you'll notice the spend rate here is metered over several years, just because of I said that wrong. The cost allocation is split over these different funding sources. We have to put the costs in the year that we bid the project, but the actual spend rate will be over 3 to 4 years. So it makes this number here at the end look very big in 2027, but in reality, we wouldn't be spending all of those dollars in 1 year. For the police department, we have another year of funding allocation for them at $5 million for their police station remodel that's being recommended. We have the water and sewer building that is placed back in the capital improvement plan for discussion. And we also have the next couple of years water main replacements in the CIP with the state and federal funding allocated for those. So that is our recommended list for our 2027 budget. Obviously, there's a lot of other projects that are in the CIP. So when we do this exercise again for 2028, you'll see a different list of projects that will come up for a recommendation. But the takeaway is to try to have council focus on this list, because that's what city staff views as the most important projects to move forward. If we can fund them all, I think that's the question we'll have to work through is how does our capital side marry up with our operations side, and what can we afford? But if we could afford everything on this list, this is what staff would recommend that we fund. One thing I want to do before I turn it over to others here, our staff in the engineering department has put together a new CIP dashboard. It's more interactive than just obviously reading a static report. I'll show you how to get there here in a little bit, but if you just look at what this website can do, it's built in with a lot of filters. So when you're zoomed all the way out of the city, you can see the entire total project cost, which matches our CIP, and then the 77 projects. But maybe I'm only concerned with engineering projects that are tier 1 that have federal funds. So I can filter this list of projects down to what I'm interested in, and then I can zoom into that particular project, click on it, and then it gives a project description, rationale as to why we're doing the project, timelines, estimated budget, and then it breaks down the funding source for that project. So not all the projects in here are completed yet. Our staff is still populating this list, but we wanted to have an interactive tool to present to the public so that it just gives them more insight into the capital improvement plan. It's more tailored to folks that want to visually look at things instead of read a long report. So you can find that on our GIS hub underneath the engineering department, and that map will come up. So with that, I told you it'd be a quick presentation. I wanted to make sure we had time in case any departments want to talk about anything. I have a couple things I'll mention, but off the bat, are there any questions from City Council that we can try to answer?
I will have questions, but do you want to have the departments talk first? Because I might get them before.
I certainly can. Yes. Okay. Just a couple of notes that I had put in regarding the engineering department. So we talked a little bit about rotating the traffic signal replacements and the city bridge rehab. Both of those types of infrastructure are critical to the city, and they're both very costly. And so the goal of this program is not to increase the amount of funding needed. It's just rotating projects so that the amount of sales tax draw can hopefully stay about the same. I'm hoping that when we get into the engineering that most of these bridge repairs will come in about the same amount of money. We haven't started any design on that yet, mainly because I wanted to make sure that council's on board with that program. But I thought this is a way to start getting into some of these other bridge repairs while not increasing the overall capital spend. Some projects that we did not choose to fund in the 2027 CIP at this point, they're listed in there obviously as a project, but they're not on the recommended list. One of the projects is the 2027 Edison Safe Routes to School project. These safe routes projects are typically about a $400,000 to $500,000 city spend when you take in all the costs that are associated with them. DOT did award funds for this project, so we're going to have to talk to them about the potential of rescinding that award. We haven't broached that subject with them yet, but if we run into trouble with that, then we'd have to have that conversation. But as of right now, projects like this, while important, they're just not going to compete with a city bridge rehab project. And so that's why we're deprioritizing those for the time being until we get caught up on some other city infrastructure. Our streetlight LED conversion, this one's kind of tough because this is one of those projects where you spend some dollars to have a lower overall operational cost in the long term, but in order to fund the project, it's also competing with other city capital. So that's a discussion item we would need to have in the city budget, whether that sort of project moves forward. Typically, we spend about $120,000 on it, or if that project gets back down a little bit or just eliminated. We've been replacing several streetlight feed points over time. So this is like the electrical control center that powers some of the neighborhood streetlights. Some of these are in really tough shape. What Stefan's been doing is he's been looking for ways to eliminate some of these, and now that we're switching to LED lights, you can send power a longer distance through the wires because the electrical load isn't as high. So we've been trying to tie some neighborhoods together. So instead of having 2 feed points power 2 neighborhoods, we can have 1 feed point power 2 neighborhoods. So we've been spending about $50,000 to $60,000 a year to link all those things together and then replace the feed point. So we'd have to talk if that project wants to keep moving forward. Right now, we're suggesting it be paused for a short period of time. One thing we never really closed the loop on is our Storm Sewer District 124. That was a project up in Northeast Minot. Council elected not to purchase the land needed for the detention pond. That pond was basically the linchpin in that whole design. So staff is taking that to mean that council doesn't want to move forward with that project anymore. So I guess we would like that confirmed so we can either stop work on it completely or reevaluate or just make sure that council's wishes are being fulfilled. And then I have a few other projects. They're more things to be aware of as a city council. So over the next decade, we're starting to plan for the replacement of 3rd Avenue and 4th Avenue in Northwest Minot, starting at Broadway and going all the way out to the bypass. Because of the way that we receive federal funds to rebuild those type of roadways, that project, if the funding holds true and the city does not inject any outside funding towards it, other than how we typically handle these reconstructions, that project would take us about 10 years to complete. 21st Avenue right now wouldn't be scheduled for construction until the 2040s, and neither would 30th Avenue Northwest. So those are 3 very important minor arterials in North Minot that we really don't have a funding source for to construct in short order. So if the city continues to grow in those areas, we're going to be short on the transportation infrastructure side for the foreseeable future. So I just wanted to make sure council's aware of that, because these projects at this time are not in the capital improvement plan. You'll probably start seeing Third Avenue start to come in this next budget cycle when the DOT will solicit for projects. But just know that there's a pretty big funding gap there for our arterial roadway network. Another thing that you'll notice is we have a lot of old infrastructure in sections of Minot. So Northeast Minot, say around Roosevelt Elementary School, or McKinley, or if you go into Northeast Minot, where the old Ramstead School used to be, Eastwood Park, that's some of our oldest infrastructure in Minot. We're touching 100 years old on a lot of that. We really don't have a good budget plan to replace that infrastructure. Most cities will replace that with some sort of combination of special assessments and general fund or utility reserve funds to replace that. That option isn't available at this time to us in Minot because of council's position on those things, which is fine. But what happens then is that maintenance keeps getting deferred, or we have to do it in a piecemeal fashion where water and sewer might come by and replace the water and sewer mains, and then engineering comes by to replace the road, but it might be 5 or 10 years later. We just don't have the funding capacity at this point to try to pool all that together in a large program like we did with downtown Minot. That option doesn't exist for us at this point. So that's another thing for council just to be aware of. If we want to start tackling some of these really old neighborhoods, we're going to need some revenue to help us get in there and take care of those infrastructure needs. That is what I have for the engineering department. I'll turn it over to my colleagues in the other city departments if they want to come up and speak to any of their projects.
Okay, I'll just sit next to Lance up here real quick. The projects on our list, the big project is obviously the Runway 826 rehabilitation for the east side. One of the caveats to this particular project is the FAA is entertaining the idea of possibly funding it this year. It depends on their discretionary funding at the end of the federal fiscal year, so they will let us know come August whether they want us to bid this project early and get it into the 2026 federal funding. That would be a benefit to the city because currently the local match and the federal match is at 95%. In 2027, the federal match drops to a 90% match. So this could save the city significant funds if we can get this project bid and built, or at least bid and awarded in 2026 with a 2026 federal grant versus 2027. So we're working in the background trying to get that done. So this potential project might drop off the list for 2027. The other large project on this list is Southside Utilities. This is a project we've been working on now for over a year. The state funded us, I believe it was $900,000 to put in infrastructure on the south side for a hangar development. We have, the intent was gas lines, water lines, and a sanitary sewer line. There was some preliminary design work being done. They discovered some issues with the proposed sanitary sewer and flowage rates. It was determined that we most likely will have to put a lift station in the area. The average lift station, I want to say, is like about $2 million construct. I'm looking at Lance.
It'd be lower than that.
But
yeah, expensive.
But it's very expensive, and it was outside the $900,000 we initially anticipated. So we're splitting this project up a little bit. We're getting the gas lines in this summer, and we're hoping to potentially do the lift station water next year.
Good afternoon. I think from my standpoint, I think the flood control projects are pretty self-explanatory along with the water and sewer projects. Water and sewer, we're going to continue to, what our plan or what we've been doing for the past couple of years, we're using DWR, Department of Water Resource, cost share for the water main replacement. They cost share at about 60%, and then we've been matching that with state revolving fund. It's 2% money for, I believe, up to 20 years. So we've been able to bump up the amount of water main replacement that we're doing at that. We're getting about 15,000 feet a year, and just trying to knock that. You know, we still have about 68 miles of cast iron water pipe in the ground that we're trying to eat that number down. It's a big number, and it takes some time. So probably the project I would look for some input from council is the water and sewer building. I think there's maybe a desire to take a step back and look and see if there's a potential to remodel, repair what we have sitting there. So other than that, unless there's additional questions, that's about all I had.
Mr. Mayor. Thank you. So Jason, yeah, I definitely want to talk about that, but my first question actually for Dave, help me understand water and storm sewer reserves a little bit, just sort of what the fund balance looks like, how it gets there, and maybe even a little history on that one if you've got it, of how it came about and how we got to the point we are.
So water, sewer, and storm sewer are all in the same fund. So that's a component of funds left over from the budgets that result primarily from rates. There is some money, significant funds in there, but some of that is storm sewer development funds that are collected for these storm sewer projects, can only be used for those funds. And there is some other reserves that are also bond covenants, restricted for bond covenants because of the debt that we have outstanding.
All right, and so right now, what do those numbers look like? I have like 35 million in my head. Is that in the ballpark?
If you give me a minute,
Sure.
I'll look it up here.
I think the last time I asked Jenna, I think she said the unrestricted balance is about 15 million.
Okay. So the rest of it is tied to bond covenants and other things like that. Okay, because that's like when we and would that also include like the other agency contribution, which is what we're talking about here with the revolving fund? I assume that we have to keep something in reserve to sort of protect that as well, and that's part of what's covered. Okay, I see nods. So that sounds good. And you know, one of my main reasons for bringing this up right now is that I think most of us, at least I do, you have a completely different mindset looking at stuff like this versus what Lance was just talking about, right? So we look at what Lance is saying, and we got no good plan for 3rd Avenue and 4th Avenue, and we got no good plan for either of the ones on the hill, primarily because we don't have a funding source outside of the general fund that's directly making sure that those things are simple. And I think for us long term, as we look at this, yeah, we can look at special assessments. That's one way of going about some of this stuff if we want to. Another way of going about it is to take a look at something along these lines to make this a little bit easier on ourselves for the things that are fundamentally government projects. Like there's no other way to build roads. We're not building private roads, okay? Even the ones that are done with private funds are still done through a city project. And so I think we need to start taking a look at some of those options that may be available to us. And again, taking the dollars out of the taxpayers' pockets, we're doing it one way or the other, and we always got to be careful about that all the way around. But at the same time, this is making decision making a lot different for these types of funds. You know, we can really have a fundamental. You know, my question before you just answered it was going to be, what's our limiting factor on replacing pipe underground? Could we do 2 more projects? Because, you know, I look at it and go, if the next one costs 3.7 million, are we truly making a trade-off between the building and the next project? But your explanation makes sense. We're eating away at it. We're using good sources of the revenue or the dollars to come in, and we're making good decisions about how we go about that to show progress at all times. And I think that that's a good thing. So, Dave, I don't know if there's anything different in the numbers that you saw, but Jason kind of answered it there. 15 unrestricted, and then the rest is tied up one way or the other.
And probably the thing that we need, and this is something that I work with the finance department as we plan these projects, and one thing that Dave keeps poking me about is, every year as I continue to stack on more SRF loans on top of more SRF loans, and there becomes a coverage thing. So we just have to make sure we're cognizant of that and continue to plan for it going forward with future rates and things of that nature, so.
Well, and that's also how we sort of get in the world with where we're headed with flood, which is just the debt service gets a little crazy over time. And so, you're not there yet, I don't think, on those ones, although it's something we always got to keep in mind. And that's why, really where I get to, and I've said it multiple times, but we need to choose good projects and then find the funding source. It shouldn't be choose a project because of the funding source. And so I think that's really where the discussion's got to get to. But, and we can get to the building when people are ready for that. If there's other questions, we can keep that going here. Did you have anything to add there?
No, the sheet I'm looking at here is a little bit dated, but I would say we would be right in about that $15 million unrestricted.
Right. And so again, when we're looking at unrestricted dollars, we're literally saying we don't know what we might use them for. And that's not to say it's a bad thing to have them, but as I've said multiple times, that makes decision making in my book a little too easy. Now it's, we got it. I mean, that's why we collect it. Might as well just build the building. Even if it went up by 1.2 million, it was above what we thought it was originally going to be. That's where decision making gets a little tougher, and that's why the unrestricted fund balances for me get a little bit scary, because if we're not right on top of them, it can lead to decision making that maybe isn't in the best interest of the public. Because again, we would all love to have the money and the ability to go build beautiful buildings all over the place, but that's not our reality today. And so we've got to make sure that we're balancing that with all of our needs.
Mr. Mayor. Alderman Blessum, just one thing to keep in mind about the utilities, probably much to Jason's concern, a lot of my projects when we do complete reconstructions, 3rd Street's a good example. The roadway is expensive, but we're replacing a lot of trunk infrastructure underneath that roadway as well. So when you look at a lot of the projects in engineering that are reconstructions like 16th Street or 3rd Street or even 11th Avenue Southwest that sits in the storm sewer division, there's a lot of, if you look at the funding sources, it'll say water sewer reserves. And so a lot of our projects, when we go all in and replace all that infrastructure, we're taking some of those reserves out of that account to replace the water sewer and storm sewer. So it might be unrestricted because we haven't issued a project, but when we're sitting down and talking with our comptroller, she's looking at that reserve balance and then seeing if the projects that we're proposing will fit within what those reserves are allocated for. So just keep that in mind. It's there as unrestricted because we haven't bid a project yet, but it's planned for a future spend.
Well, and for me, that's why the CIP is so important, right? So we can have visibility. I mean, we can sit right now and look in the overall document and see that, I don't remember the number, it's probably 15 to 18 water main replacements that are already on the list. And if there's 68 miles, there might even be more than that, right, that are out there. So we always have visibility that those are coming, and we know that we've got to keep that in mind, and we're able to kind of balance where that goes. And so, again, I guess maybe two points to everything I'm saying here. One is that this mechanism seems to work well for the things that the utility side is needing. It makes these decisions sort of make sense. And I contrast that with your side on the engineering side, Lance, where it's like, ugh. Like on your side on the general fund, we're essentially saying pay our staff or build our roads. Because that is the bucket where we've got a defined revenue stream going into water and sewer reserves that are making sure that those decisions work over time. And so it's really just something for us to think about as we go forward, because we're gonna have to figure out how to make this work and then make our general fund make sense.
Any other departments? Any other departments want to come up? You don't have to.
Well, yeah, I mean, if we're at that point, then I do want to talk about the building. And so, Jason, I'd like to understand what, if you have taken a look at what rehabbing that building would look like, and what, again, if we're in a money is no object world, yeah, let's build the nice, beautiful building and landscaping and all the stuff that goes with it. I think we'd all probably agree we're not exactly in that world. We're somewhere in between. We've got the funding available, but at the same time, if I've got $3.7 million to work with, should I replace more water main or should I build a building out there? I mean, that's where my mind goes, right? So I'd like to understand a little bit about what rehab looks like, because the other thing I want to be really careful about is, in my mind, my house doesn't have a usable life, right? Accounting says it does, but it doesn't. If I do what I'm supposed to do, that house should outlive me with no problem and should outlive my grandkids, right? Buildings generally should work that way. Now, we've been told a couple times over the last couple of years that we're at the end of a reasonable life on a building. We were sort of told that with the police station. We stepped back from that. We're gonna have that discussion in a little bit. But if we're heading towards not having buildings viable over an amount of time, then we're not doing our job, and we need to be told to do it better to make sure we're funding the maintenance to keep up. The school district is in a terrible spot with this right now. We are not, as far as I know. Doesn't mean we don't have things to do, and that we've talked about the library to a certain extent that way. I think there are things that we need to stay on top of, but I'd kind of like to hear what you think, Jason, and what would it take if we wanted to rehab it and make sure it's not leaking. I know the facade is goofed up. There's some things that we need to do there if we went that direction. Then it becomes, okay, which is the better option?
Sure. So that building, we don't know when the building was built exactly. I think if in the file I found a move permit from 1981. So it was moved from somewhere. So it was probably a late 1960s, 1970s building that was moved on and then added on to. So yeah, like you said, the concern we have is the roof. What we've been told is, just putting a skin on top of that roof won't fix it because of that front bump out, and that's part of the structure of the roof. I'm not a structural engineer, so I think probably the next step, if we want to look into like what that rehab option would look like, would be to, I have Ackerman on, under contract for the project. There's still some remaining funds since we're not moving forward with the bidding and the construction. So I could task them with a task order to, look at what that rehab would cost. Actually, someone with a structural engineering background, look at the roof. Can it be just reskinned? Does it require, new rafters? What does that look like? Additionally, part of the remodel then, or part of the new building was going to be to add a little more space. I have a pretty cramped space where my 3 foremen are, so we can also include that as, what just a generic, 5 or 1,000 square foot addition to it would cost, just to give us all a little space in that facility. So if that's the wish of council, I can certainly kind of add a scope adjustment to Ackerman's contract, and we can go through that exercise and see what it looks like.
I mean, for me, speaking personally, I would like to see that, because I think it makes more sense. I think we want to address the things that you're identifying, because I can't sit here and say, hey, don't let our buildings get run down, and then not fund it when you want to fix them up, right? I mean, we need to do the stuff. And I'm not saying that means, oh, let's go do a $40,000 roof. It might take us $750,000 to do what you guys need to do, but that's not $3.7 million either. Right. So right. I think that there's a middle ground there that can make a lot of sense. And I think at least something that fits my mind better with how we ought to go about this. Because, one of the things that I did is I went through the entire CIP list top to bottom, and I looked at projects in there where I saw, if we did this project, there isn't a soul in this city, probably outside of this room, that would even know that it happened. Right. When Lance and team goes and does 16th Street at the bypass, they're going to know it, right? We're going to have a big project. They're going to see new streetlights. We're going to work through some of the things that go on there. And so I think we always, as leaders within the community, we always need to understand that it doesn't mean that we can't do them or we shouldn't do them, but I think we have to weigh them a little bit differently when the public literally is going to see very little impact from that. right? For me, that's where the weighting does kind of come in, and rather than get into what the committee rated it and how we go about that, I'd just love to see the alternative. So I think for me, I'd like to see that if we want a motion, I'm happy to make that motion to take that direction. I don't know what the others, if anybody else. Yeah, I'll move it, yeah.
Okay, any discussion on the motion? Go ahead, Paul.
Let's talk a lot. Do you need, will there be additional funds? Is there any need for additional funds on that? Do you feel like what you have left is adequate for funding that scope, or is that something you have to bring back to council?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Pittner, no. At this point, there's some unspent funds because we are not progressing. You know, if the decision is that we go through the motions of seeing what the rehab costs, and if the rehab costs are higher than we expect, and then we decide to proceed, then, you know, I need to refill that bucket a little bit, but we've got the funds currently to move forward.
Okay, any further discussion? All right, seeing none, are we calling the roll,
Yeah.
City Clerk?
So I'm gonna put the motion down as direct Jason Swanson to work with Ackerman Municipal on a task order for the water sewer building in regards to rehab costs. Is that correct? Okay, Blessum?
Yes.
Fuller?
Yes.
Hayes?
Yes.
Janser?
Yes.
Olson?
Yes.
Pittner?
Yes.
Samuelson?
Yes.
Motion passed.
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, I just wanted to point out one thing too that Jason touched on. About 55 or 60 miles of water main, cast iron water main that needs replacing. We're working on about a 3 miles per year pace. So my math says in 20 years we should have that accomplished, providing that all of the state funding programs stay in existence as they are today. Otherwise, if some of that funding goes away, that becomes a much longer window. And if you guys are paying attention in some of the council forums and mayor forums last week, Jason got beat up a little bit on water quality. And I just want to point out that when the water leaves the water plant, it meets all the quality requirements and it's clear and looks good and everything else. The problem is in the distribution system. And those cast iron water mains, if you're out on the end of one of those mains that's corroded and choked down, that's where the quality issues come in. So if you're one of the people on the end of one of those lines and the replacement window is 20 years out, we're going to hear from this for the next 20 years.
So Dave or Jason, are just to his point, are we maximizing what we can do with the state right now?
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Blessum, you know, I would say we could do more. We probably have contractor capacity, but then when we talk about when Lance starts tearing up $11 million worth of projects and I start doing another 10 and then we have a flood control project, it gets to be really impactful for the residents of Minot. So we just have to be cognizant of that as well to make sure that when we do a project, we're doing it in a different quadrant than where Lance is doing a project. So, you know, and then like Dave said, as long as those state dollars remain, the Resources Trust Fund, which is what's funding our cost share through DWR, you know, that has some revenue concerns as well with oil kind of slowing down. So there's been talk of kind of changing their cost share policy as they've been having state water commission meetings of changing kind of how they do some of that. So it's kind of to be determined, but I'm pretty comfortable with the amount that we're doing. I would like to ramp it up, you know, a little bit more, but it just they're big impactful projects for the people that have to be around them. So.
Any further comments from staff or any further discussion from anybody? Alderman Blessum?
Yeah, if I could, I'd love an update from the chief of police or Tom. You know, we've got a $5 million pile of money sitting in this plan. I'd like to hear what the 5 is doing this year and what the prospects look like for this, and maybe most importantly, what the prospects look like for the third 5. Because, you know, just being honest about it again, you guys know I always am, I would kind of love to see us hit the end of this project during this 5, not the next one. And I just want to hear from you guys where you're at.
Chief Fry.
Lovely.
Mr. Mayor, if I could, real quick.
Go ahead, sir.
Yeah, Mr. Mayor, Alderman Blessam. So I'll let Chief talk, specifically what his team has been doing with Ackerman Esfold and kind of where they are. But to your point, as we get towards the city manager's budget presentation, come July, all of this will be in the mix, right? Because it's just many, many competing priorities with a limited amount of resources, and we know that. So that's how it'll be presented. And so I agree. If we can get after the most critical infrastructure improvements with this $5 million, and then we see, not saying the next 2 tranches aren't important, but again, if we can get after the most critical with this first $5 million, that would be helpful as I'm making a presentation to council this summer on where I recommend our resources go.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Blessam. What we're looking at right now, we've gone through several different group think tanks with Ackerman Esfold, going through all the processes, and they're in the process now of the design, kind of looking at where are we at, how is it going to fit within the building. They're working without a signed contract just now, and so we're in the process of that'll be presented as well for us to move forward. So we don't have the exact numbers yet, but we're in the process of figuring out where all of this is.
Chief, do you expect, will we see building going on this year? That we're doing a lot of design, and I know that's always a big part of the project, and we're going to spend some money on that part of it, but will we see something for our officers this year in the building?
I cannot say that it will happen this year. It could happen in the fall, but they also have to look at contractors and other things like that, what's available to make those things happen. And so that's going to be up in the air once we get to a point of we all agree. That'll be part of that first phase to bring that back to the council and say, this is what we spent so far. This is what's been decided upon. Now, are we ready to move? So those are all part of the processes.
Okay. So Chief or Tom, in the original $5 million that's being, it's at least on the budget to be spent during 26. How much of that do we expect to be on engineering and architecture out of that money?
Mayor Janser, Alderman Blessam, and Lance, you can correct me, and Chief, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think we're roughly 200,000, right? So we're in the $200,000 ballpark on engineering and design.
So with that in mind, then, what I'm hearing from you, Chief, and based on that number, that may be the main contribution in 26, is what I'm hearing. And so the 5 that we are contemplating in the CIP right now actually could, 4 of that could still be there because we didn't find a way to spend it this year. And Dave, I don't know if I've got the right way to think about that. You can correct me if you want me to think about it a different way. But is that what I'm hearing right now? Because we may not be able to actually get the first 5 spent.
Mr. Mayor, Alderman Blessam, I think we'd be looking at the design and then would go through the bidding process. However, before you can award the bids, you have to have the money appropriated. So even if this went out to bid in late fall and you were going to award the contract, you have to have the money appropriated, even though it may not be spent until a future year. If it's not awarded by the end of the year, then the council would have to take action to reappropriate those funds in a future year. So I think the way this is laid out, it's 5 million in 26. It's an additional 5 million in 27 is what is contemplated with the CIP.
And so, Tom, will you have enough information by the time that we hear from you this summer to understand this better? And I mean, like you said, it's a part of the big picture for the general fund, really. And so we're gonna need to understand how that's all laying out by year even to know it. So, okay, thank you.
That's absolutely the intent.
Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Okay, I think we had the Chief's fire training area classroom. Anybody have questions for the chief on that out of the training area?
I'll just make a comment. I think if you've been out there and experienced that classroom, there's not a whole lot of question about it needing to be changed, upgraded, whatever.
Mr. Mayor? Unless anyone has any more specific questions on the proposed CIP, I just have a couple comments. So first, kudos to Lance and his team. Kudos to the staff members who participated. This is my third season in seeing a CIP. It's gotten better every year. Our team is they're more critical of each other's projects. Last year they didn't want to say anything bad about each other's projects, right? So, so I sat in as an observer. I purposefully didn't go attend in person, but I listened in, made just a few comments as they rack and stacked, and really just great questions of each other's projects, kind of putting them on the spot in a good way. I mean, cordial, collegial, but we're really trying to rack and stack priorities. So based on, again, what is affordable, we can draw a line. So council can somewhere draw a line. So that is the intent this summer. It's just kind of understanding at this point staff's priorities. There's a lot of needs, requirements, however common, they totally understand where we are at in resources. So that's the proposal for 27. So unless there's any more questions on that, I asked Dave, do you have that information? Just so we're all on the same page too, because this whole budget cap is new information too that we've gone through. So just want to ensure everybody understands the process of the 3% and the 3% to the 6%. I mean, there's actually spreadsheets that all the cities are given to use. So Dave's just gonna go through the 26 3% cap calculation worksheet and how that works based on prior years and give an idea of what our cap could be, right? So if we were levied at 20.1 million in 25, that was the levy that council approved. What is in the realm of possible, not saying that anybody wants to do it. That's not what we're saying. It's just about informing everybody of what is in the realm of possible, in terms of property tax levy or EA.
Okay, so we did update these numbers as of earlier today. I'll just caveat this. This is still a little bit in flux. Ryan still gets some adjustments to values either through the appeals process or property tax or properties coming on or going off the tax rolls. So it's still a little bit to be determined yet. So we just go through the calculation. There's two different ways to calculate this. The first calculation is based on the base year calculation with the highest in the last preceding 3 years. There are some adjustments that are made for bonded indebtedness and special assessments that are included in that. So you come up with the highest base year. Our highest base year was the 2023 levy year, which would be our 2024 budget year. At just under 27 million of the adjusted levy amount. And then we go through this other calculation with the prior year adjusted amount plus the 3% and growth calculations of what came on and off for the growth. And because we've decreased the last couple of years in the levy, our highest year is still that base year from the 2024 budget year. So we do the calculation, carry forward our 3% cap from the prior calculation. Our maximum that we would calculate is going to be right in that area, 29.585 million would be the maximum amount that we'd be able to levy. And that gets us down to 1/10 of, or 1/100th of a percent carryover. It didn't get any more finite in my guesses after that, but that puts us in the ballpark. Again, this can change as we move through the process a little bit. Again, one point I want to make too is we can only look back 3 years. So after we get through this budget year, this 2023 tax year will drop off, and then 2024 would be the highest year in our look back period. Questions on any of that?
Mr. Mayor?
Go ahead.
So I think the real point here is, I may not be talking to everybody in this room, but okay, we are talking to the public. So when you have the 3%, we didn't use any of it last year, right? We didn't, the determination was 3% wasn't used. So the 3% plus 3% is 6%. It's not exactly 6% because some of the things that Dave just pointed out here, but it is, and it's of the highest tax levy, and that number isn't exactly, because it was 28,520,000, I think, Dave, right? So that that comes down a little bit too, but the whole point is just to kind of to share with the public. When you hear 3%, yes, it is 3%. If we had used 1% last year, it would be 5%, right? Or that kind of thing. But there is a spreadsheet. There's a calculation on how we get to it. If anybody has any additional questions, they can ask us. But just wanted to share that with council. I know we had some council candidates here as well, and the public, and just kind of understand how that calculation works.
Any questions for the finance director on that? Okay. All right. Anything else to offer today?
One quick thing, back to that storms for District 124. I didn't know if today was the time we wanted to discuss that, or if council would rather have me bring back a specific agenda item on that to decide that project's fate. I can certainly do that too. I'll leave it in your hands how we kind of want to deal with that project.
Lance, I guess let me ask you this: given that the detention pond decision was made, that's not going to be part of whatever that project would be. Does the fact that it is going to have a detention pond where you had planned for it, does that essentially kill the project or eliminate it, or is there some modified version to be looked at, or what is the reality of that decision to the conversation that you're asking about?
Mr. Mayor, members of the council, the detention pond was needed to try to meter the water through the basin. So when we increased the pipe capacity in Broadway to keep Broadway and the frontage road from flooding under certain rain events, basically we were using Broadway right away as the detention pond. So if we eliminate that, we have to account for that storage somewhere else in the system. So that's why we increased the size of the Stonebridge Farms detention pond, because we can utilize some of that space, and then it just makes the system more efficient. So if we're not going to do the detention pond there anymore, then we would have to find a different location for another detention pond. So we'd have to start all over on finding that location, modeling the system, and then eventually purchasing land for a pond. So part of that design would not be affected, so the work in Broadway in that system, that's fine, that's not gonna change, but it's basically everything downstream from where the water outlets the existing pipe to the end of the project. And then the other thing that doesn't get addressed is the erosion issues that we're having on the south side of 30th Avenue, that at this time with stopping the project, we don't have a solution for that. So those are some things I wanted to make sure council's aware of. If someday we wanted to restart that project in a different shape or form, there's some redesign effort that would have to take place and potential land purchasing for the other infrastructure.
In regards to that, the property now has gone into a master plan, will go in front of the planning commission to utilize the 4 lots that were originally in that purchase. There is, however, roughly 2 acres to the south that runs along that detention pond all the way out to the, was it 11? 13? That I would be willing to deed over to the city for $1. I mean, and I think maybe if you look at it, there may be some potential for still a detention pond if it was just to the side instead of to the east. So it might be still worth looking at rather than completely kick it to the curb. There will be no cost to the city, it's land that we wouldn't use.
So, I guess at this point, maybe that's a thing to look at and determine if there's a design that would be able to work with that. And I guess, I don't know if we need a motion, but maybe bring back a different idea or something.
We can certainly look at that, Mr. Mayor. I think from what I was understanding and hearing from council was maybe there's not a desire to do the project at all at any cost. And I think that's what on our staff level we're not understanding is that we don't want to see the project at all, or do we want to see it in a different shape or form? We never got to have that discussion, and so that's why we're scrambling a little bit, and we just paused everything until we can talk with you folks on how we want to proceed, if at all.
Mr. Mayor.
Alderman Fuller.
Thank you. And I guess maybe I'll just speak a little bit for the group here, Lance. I don't think it was that we said, hey, we don't want to see the project, but we did make a deal on the price on the land. So I guess I'm not opposed to seeing other options or other alternatives. If Alderman Hayes is willing to do something with some land they're not going to use or anything else you may come up with. But at least in my mind, I think the only reason it didn't come forward is because we couldn't make a deal on the land. We just thought it was more than we wanted to spend at the time.
Further thoughts? Alderman Russell.
Yeah, I guess what I would just kind of echo some of that, Lance. The main thing that I would want to understand with it, you guys just went through a great exercise that we just spent an hour and a half on roughly. I'd like to understand how this project fits the overall thought process, right? Because if I remember the numbers right, this project started at something like $700,000. Next iteration was 2.3. I assume now we're like 80 north of that already, and we're even talking about different lands. So we have to see how it fits that overall picture. But I also don't want that to ever be, we're giving up on the engineering vision here, because we have to solve problems in our city. I mean, that's the point. And where that fits in the priority is the most important thing for me, and just making sure. Yeah.
Lance, does that give you sort of a bit more clarity as to kind of where this is at?
Yes, we'll look at some options and then approach council again and let you know what those might be.
All right. Thank you very much. Any further? Alderman Olson.
There we go. Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So I just want to kind of end this meeting for the people that are watching, or for the people that follow on social media or whatever it is. These meetings kind of have two purposes. One is for staff and council to discuss what should be put in the city manager's proposed budget in a few months. And then the second is to get that information out to the public early so that they can give input. By the time that the budget rolls out, I'm going to be a resident. I'm not going to be voting. And that's true for 3 of us up here. So I want to encourage people to get in touch with the existing aldermen who will be voting and the candidates and decide what is important, because it's super easy to say cut taxes. But people need to know what you want cut or what you want left in, because then it makes this budget real. So reach out. That's just my encouragement.
Okay, good comments, thank you. Anything further before we adjourn this afternoon? Lance, one more?
Just to talk about process, so after today's workshop at the May 4th council meeting, we'll have a public hearing on the capital improvement plan, so that would be an opportunity if you as the council, now that you have some time to review it here in the next few weeks, if you have questions or comments or want changes at that meeting, you could suggest that or direct staff to make changes. The public would then have the opportunity to comment on the plan and provide their thoughts or feedback. And then at the second meeting in May, whatever decisions were made that night by the city council would be incorporated into a draft capital improvement plan and then presented at the May 20th meeting as final. So that's our schedule coming up regarding the capital improvement plan.
Okay, more coming up. Sir?
My name is Isaiah. I'm a city council candidate. I just had a question regarding the airport project. I've got some direct connections with employees that work in the FAA here in Minot, and one of the things they mentioned was, you know, some of the projects maybe not being eligible for federal grants because they're not FAA, and I think one of the things that they were concerned about is the radar tower or something like that. They mentioned the runway as well, but maybe just clarification as far as, you know, the benefits of using more FAA involvement. I know it's more costs there, but just from my understanding, just to get my head wrapped around some of the finances on the airport. Thank you.
Sure. The airport is funded through a bunch of different means and funding revenue sources. For projects, large projects on the airport, we get what are called FAA AIP entitlement funds. AIP is Airport Improvement Program funding. It is based off of the number of enplanements and cargo operations and things like that. Enplanements are the passengers that get on to the aircraft on an annual basis. That calculation is based, they take the number of enplanements that we have compared to the entire nation, and then they allocate their funds that have been appropriated by the U.S. Congress. Currently, we get about $1.7 million of what's called entitlement funds from the CIP project, or funding levels. And then once those AIP entitlement funds are used on eligible projects, there's a probably 500-page document on what's considered eligible. Then those funds are allocated out to the different airports within the state and within the nation. In addition to that, the FAA has what are called supplemental funds, and they have discretionary funds. So those funds are, supplemental funds are basically funds that Congress, U.S. Congress has allocated for specific projects on airports across the nation. And then the discretionary funds are funds that are like, if let's say, I think I'm going to do a $10 million project, the bids come in, it's only $9 million, well, there's $1 million surplus on what the FAA planned for my project. So that gets turned over into the funding level for the FAA to decide where it goes. So that's kind of the biggest capital improvement program funding. Other funding that we get is through our revenues from our users. So we have lease agreements, we have landing fees, we have all kinds of different revenue sources from our users. The parking fees that you pay when you come and park at the airport, those are also part of our revenue sources. Let's see, you had a two-part question. The question about the radar. So the radar, it would be an FAA-funded project. Currently, the radar in our region is at the Air Force Base. So the Air Force Base actually controls our radar systems within the airport's region. So, and actually the controllers that are watching and monitoring that particular airspace are, they're actually down at Ellsworth Air Force Base down in Rapid City. So, so even our local tower, because of the type of tower we are, we do not have radar inside the tower. That would be a decision on the FAA side, not the airport side, on whether there would be a radar installed inside the, or at least a radar monitor installed inside of the tower. They would most likely just connect to the radar that already exists out of the Air Force Base. To answer your question?
Yeah. All right, anything further? See, nothing more. I got a motion a second to adjourn. All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Any opposed, nay. That meeting is adjourned.